Grateful to have you all here, and Denise and Natalie, thanks for joining us, and all our colleagues at CTL, grateful to have each of you here. Um, when it comes to assessment, and we've mentioned this in new faculty workshops, nobody wants to go into teaching or learning, or go into teaching, let's say, to become a professor, because they can't wait to assess somebody. That's generally not the number one goal, right? But those same individuals are very excited about student growth. And so what we're going to talk today, in a way, we'll talk about a number of things, is how to leverage assessments for student growth, and at the program level and also the course level. So I'll share my screen here, and I'm going to quote here. Let's see. Mike, can you see? I'm going to now go into presentation mode, right?
Yes, we can see your slide. Well, it's not the present. There we go. Yeah,
There we
it's
go.
perfect.
Okay, excellent. All right. So assessing the total person, we talk about teaching or the balanced development of the total person. And part of that development is giving the students an opportunity to be assessed and to assess themselves. And here is that quote in the BYU mission statement: all instruction programs and services at BYU, including a wide variety of extracurricular experiences, should make their own contribution toward the balanced development of the total person. So this is an interesting proposition for our courses. And a lot of times when we think of the balanced development of the total person, we are thinking of the aims of a BYU education, which is very appropriate. Is character development occurring? Is lifelong learning, is that a part of who they are? Is the experience spiritually and strengthening? But many times the intellectually enlarging is sometimes just viewed as kind of its own thing, but I would suggest that it also can be holistic, looking at the holistic nature of the intellectually enlarging aim. And part of the intellectually enlarging category that we've been discussing is this idea of what we would describe as patterns of disciplinary engagement. How the students actually come out of Dr. Stevens' class, right? And how do they engage with the world? Now, some of our courses are at the 100 and 200 level, and that might be a little harder to conceptualize, but we still encourage faculty to do that. What does it look like to engage with another human being with the skills and knowledge that they're gaining in your course? And if you can fashion that learning outcome, that what we'd call disciplinary engagement. You're going to see some examples here today. Those are actually much easier to conceptualize a powerful assessment. Obviously, if my learning outcome is students will remember a ton of anatomy, in an anatomy course, anatomy, anatomy, um, they are not going to come out of that assessment feeling very transformed. But if they can use that content in the service of a higher purpose, interacting with another human being or another group or serving a greater cause, that's different. And their retention most likely will increase. So your students, here it is. What does a balanced development of the total person look like in your courses? And note, I'm going to add programs, your programs. And this is the assessment question. How will you know if this is actually happening? Okay. So one of the things we talk about in our workshop is when we talk about a culminating experience, one that the students are using multiple skills and abilities simultaneously, and at the same time, we may be asking them about these other aims of a BYU education. The question we ask new faculty is, what would cause your head to just nod involuntarily and basically say, that's my student, that's my student? And in my consultations, one of my favorite part is when faculty come in, and in my old office, I had a big screen, and I think I'll get a screen again. And if I do, I love show and tell. I love when faculty come in and say, because I'll ask them, bring me the student artifacts. at the end of the semester. And I find that when those artifacts are showing higher levels of performance that, that are a little bit more authentic than your typical kind of assessment experience, and they're holistic, multiple things are happening simultaneously, I see faculty get a lot more excited. Now, let's say I was teaching a 100 level course, and sorry to beat up on those courses because they are great in their own right, but I showed you my final, and it is tons of fragmented content that's being assessed. You're not going to see me get super excited about that. Now, I may say, well, I don't have to get excited. That's what they need. But we would make the case that if you can situate the content into a higher level meaningful performance, their 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 retention will increase, but you won't be able to cover as much. Because as we know, as you go up the cognitive process ladder, the content starts to shrink because you're going to have to take more time for them to really get into the process. So that's a curricular decision we all face as we're dealing with this. So at BYU, we want your students to impress you. And let me just add one more slide. Ready, Julie? A lot. There we go. Want to impress you a lot. We want all of them to impress you in some form or fashion. So what would you accept as evidence that they are knocking it out of the park? And here at CTL, we lead faculty and program leaders, as it says here, through a process to not only collect evidence of high-level performance, but provide the pathway for students to achieve it. So it's one thing to capture it and draw conclusions about their abilities based on what they turn in at the end of the semester or the end of the program. But then comes the question, how can I get a pathway of growth, a trajectory of growth that will match, that will really prepare them so by the time they get to that culminating experience, it's like coming home. They are ready to perform at a high level, and they will impress you more than even maybe students in the past have. So here's the principle to consider. The actual assessment is the tip of the iceberg. So I'll have faculty ask me, say, can I see your assessment? And I'm happy to look at the technical aspects of the assessment because those do play a role. But as it says here, student preparation and incremental development should show a developmental path that culminates in students performing at a high level on their culminating course or program experience. So my question is, what was the runway that brought them to that assessment? So if I am a completely unprepared student, or I crammed last night for some kind of assessment that is cram worthy, then what am I bringing to the assessment experience? That is part of the assessment experience, right? But as my students have practiced over the course of time, building skills, building on other skills, and by the time they get to the culminating experience, when you've got that nice alignment, that pathway of development, then when they take that assessment, it's a different experience. It's a different assessment. And so that's something we'd like all of us to consider is the idea that the assessment doesn't stand alone. And here is the overused metaphor of the iceberg, where yes, here is my, and this is, there's a lot of adjectives in this in this arrow, but it's what we're really asking programs to begin to really think about, or this will confirm what they're already doing. Something that's culminating, that draws on it's kind of that final the grand finale, right, of the program or the course. Something that's holistic, where you're bringing in multiple skills simultaneously or other attributes, BYU Ames attributes. Authentic, the extent to it's authentic, they encode these concepts and principles. They develop a fluency, ability to speak in a more authentic scenario, um, is powerful for their retention and meaningful when they leave the academy. And then finally, scalable and authentic, they kind of work with or against each other. The more authentic, probably the less scalable. Um, and then, of course, we look at developmental path to perform very well on that culminating experience. So we begin with a developmental path, and we're going to start at the program level. And here it comes. So backward design and forward implementation, these two words I'd like you to consider. So imagine we're all faculty in a program, a new program we're creating or redesigning. And the first thing we could do is think about what are our students like coming out of the program? First day in the program, last day in the program. What's the difference? how they talk, how they think, how they reason. And I'm confident there is a big difference, right, across the academy. But we try to conceptualize at a high level, what could they do? We have an eye to industry trends, what's going on in the industry. We have an eye to discipleship, to the aims of a BYU education. What's it like to be a disciple professional? A disciple, just a disciple, right? Not just, of course, a disciple is paramount. And then from there, we from that learning the program outcomes, we derive what I would say operational learning outcomes. The program purpose tends to be more aspirational, whereas the learning outcomes tend to be more operational. Then from there comes the culminating, holistic, authentic, scalable experience. So let's imagine we're all pioneers, we're starting a new program, we get our program purpose, we get our learning outcomes, and then we create the blueprint for a holistic, culminating, authentic, scalable assessment. Now, our first assessment will be our worst assessment because we have to do usability testing on that assessment. We have to work it and see what is it it really gives us. Are the students just painting by the numbers? There's nothing really transferable going on? Or is there some meaningful things going on in that assessment? And those good assessments have to be tested with students and refined over time. And then we look at like progress checks. Mike was talking about, Mike, could you talk about the progress checks from the performing arts? You were
Uh,
talking about
you
that.
bet. Yeah, in some of the performing arts, for example, the acting program, in music performing musical performance and dance and so forth. They in some of their programs they have semester proficiency or juries where they evaluate them on an ongoing basis in um, their improvement of the skills toward the program, and that way they get feedback not just from the individual instructors but from more from a broader range of faculty toward ultimately a culminating assessment like a senior recital or a senior project that um, puts it all together, and hopefully they've benefited from those progress checks, as it were, along the way.
Thank you, Mike. The example I used as well with Mike in the previous group was nursing. Ursula Sorensen is the consultant to the Nursing College of Nursing, and we've noticed, and Ursula's introduced me to their world where they have clinicals. So those are high stakes, culminating experiences. Those clinicals are out in hospitals and clinics. And then the year prior to that, let's work backwards. They have what are called simulations. They have a simulation center. And the year prior to that, they have what are called labs. But you can see these progress checks are building upon each other. So by the time they get to the grand finale, they're very well practiced. So it's not enough just to practice individual course skills, it's bringing them all together. And I think a lot, Denise and I have talked about capstones in physics and capstones in other programs. And I found some of them to be really good and others they once we really get into the nitty gritty, what they're really capturing, we find, wow, we can do some iterative work over time and really improve the robustness of those culminating experiences because they drive everything. They can drive everything. And you can imagine students coming out of a program going, I will never forget that experience. Every course. Now, we don't live in a perfect millennial world, right? But imagine it felt like almost every course was building to a crescendo. I could see it. It didn't feel like I had a franchise Dr. Plummer class here, a franchise Professor Johnson here, an amazing Professor Swallow there. And then taken all together, it was just a good experience. I got a lot of intellectual stamina, which is great, by the way, but a course where they really felt the synergy going on. I know this is not easy to achieve in any given department, but something to consider. So from here, then you can imagine we're all a department, we're meeting together, we're in a program. And imagine us meeting, and as it says here, it's recommended that faculty meet yearly to analyze the results of their culminating holistic and authentic assessment. Note this, reviewing actual representative student work. Is that crazy talk or what? Imagine bringing in the student work. Because you're going to learn something about your culminating assessment. You're going to learn how well did it detect the multiple skills and attributes we want them to have. How well did it do that? And I feel that should be a question every single year. You would be very worried if you heard me say, well, we put a great assessment together 5 years ago. Now, especially if you're in computer science, that wouldn't work because the field is just moving, right? But every field, not just because of AI, but every field is beginning to move in terms of its targets. And so this would be a very healthy discussion to be having at the end of the semester. Um, Based on this analysis and student ratings, areas of strength and opportunities for improvement are identified, and then we iterate into the future. Little improvements here, little improvements there. In this meeting, here's another idea that may or may not fly in some departments, but representative student work from each course may be presented to evaluate the strength of student performance in its contribution, note, to the program's culminating assessment. So let's say I'm in the nursing program and for some crazy reason they have to take stats because I co-teach a stats course. So we get in there and Denise is looking and Natalie and Julie and Mike and Ursula and anyone else who's on the call. We're looking at some student work and we say, look, 70% of our students seem to meet expectations. And these meet expectations for 2025 are very different from 2020. I mean, we really worked to get these students up to higher levels of abilities. And then someone says, Ken, not to put you on the spot, but can you help me understand why it seems like their quantitative ability, their literacy is lacking? Okay. Now, Denise, let's say she asked me that, but she doesn't want me to feel bad, right, Denise? So she's going to say in a very nice way, not put me on the spot. And all she may say is, Ken, just help me understand. I'll say, you know what? We have had more of a production model in statistics where they have to produce results. But I'm beginning to see that the consumer model is not very strong in my class. Let me circle the wagons with some of our other colleagues here, and let's see how we can do a little bit of a redesign and reorient their efforts to become better consumers of literature. So any faculty member can go off in the wild blue yonder like I have, and I forget what aspect of this do they really, really need in terms of becoming the whole person. Then our individual courses, like I mentioned before, become less franchises and they begin to flow. Now, I'm not suggesting this is the only way to do that, but some kind of conversation there. Okay, so here's just a visual of a bunch of holistic performances that are coming out. I will have to say when we were in Peru, it was kind of interesting. We went to some approving university and we did a training on backward designing entire programs. Most of them were in engineering and some were in sociology and psychology. When we asked them to show us what their students can do at the end of the course, cumulatively, guess what they gave us? Their syllabi. And our answer to that was, we don't want your syllabi. We don't want you to show us what you think the course is about. We want to see the output from your course. Show us what the students can do. And that's a paradigm shift because typically in education, I, like many, have been input oriented. Input, what will I teach on a given day? What am I? An input is important, but by itself, it is very incomplete. It has to have an output component. If you have the output component, that informs the input component and it's kind of cyclical. So that's why you can see at CTL, we're really trying to emphasize this point on student work, showing the work here. And then here's just an example of nursing. What are the contributions of each of those courses, not in terms of the syllabus, in terms of student artifacts and what they produce? Okay, now we come to the course level. We're going to scale, we're going to use the same kind of methodology, backward design that we did with the program level, but now with the course level. And there's a few distinctions. But we start with forward implementation. What is Natalie Chambers like when she first enters my stats class? Now, Natalie, you may be a statistician, and I don't know that. But if you're not, I'm usually safe because statisticians, they don't
I
travel
got
in.
through I got through stats 121 with a B, and that's as far as I go.
That's good. You've impressed me. Well done. That's great. So So we look at this and we say, what do we want our students to become by the end of this course? Just like the program. What are the learning outcomes that are derived from the course purpose? Now we're going to create the blueprint for a culminating holistic experience. And then we put that at the end, typically at the end, although it can show up in many parts of the course, but typically it's more the grand finale. And then we have, and this part is really important in developing the structure of the course, a progress check. And notice it says the least complex version of the culminating experience. It looks kind of like the culminating experience, but what you would expect at some week in the semester. So let's say that's week 4 right there. And let's say that's week 11. Now, in the course I co-teach, it's week 8. We have one progress check. And it's not like a quiz. It's not even like a multiple choice exam, although it does have some of those items, but it's really how they're building towards this culminating crescendo at the end of the course. And then from there, then we can say it's much easier to say, what am I going to do week 1? What are they going to do week 2? What are they going to do week 3? And then they're ready for progress check 1. What are they going to do for week 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10? Ready for progress check in week 11. The idea is the before class, during class, and after class is designed to do some kind of sequence of explain, demo, practice, feed forward. By feed forward, we mean that they can metacognitively tell you where they're weak, and you actually have given them enough practice problems, thank goodness for AI that can produce this, enough practice problems for them to do something about it. And you don't have to be holding their hand the whole time. That they themselves can reach out and see where their gaps are and address them. And then you do that for the entire semester. Okay. So what our recommendation is to show student work across as in many locations as you can. When you go in for annual stewardship interview, now I'm a physics professor. I'm going to my department chair, Denise Stevens. I'm going in there for our annual stewardship interview. And let's imagine that Denise says, Ken, let's see the output. Give me a sample of student work and let's talk about it. Now that would be exciting, I think. Instead of Denise having to say, Ken, you got a 4.1 on the student ratings. And some of the comments are good and some of them are not so good. Imagine leading with student performance, then hit student ratings. But then we're talking about student ratings, not in terms of what my problems are, and I might have some that need to be addressed, but how those issues could affect the students and how we can affect them even better if I address them. I've talked to many faculty about this possibility, and there is definitely a comfort level in not leading with student ratings, but leading with student learning. Denise, let me get your thoughts and any others that have joined us just on that idea of leading with student performance and then student ratings in the context of performance. Just like to hear your thoughts. Sorry to put you on the spot,
Okay.
but I know you. So
I'm loving this, right? I'm excited about trying this the annual thing, right? It's just the other faculty in astronomy, at least, to say, hey, how's our program going, right? Our end results, what we're expecting. But I love this idea. I think I just, like I said, I never look at the numbers. I really don't care on the
right,
student ratings, right? I care more about the comments, but I also think this is a better way to go. Are they actually learning and take the focus off of how entertaining I am in the classroom? Because I think a lot of it's entertainment value for the students
right,
or how much they love you versus, yeah, I like this. Start with their work. Are they accomplishing what we want them to? Are they able to do what we're expecting them to do? Or are we just creating classes to teach classes?
right.
I'm
Yeah,
excited.
yeah. Thank you, Denise. I appreciate that. And I'll even say my co-teach instructor and I, we've done this where we'll sit down, and one semester we thought we had talked to a lot of our students and they didn't have good fluency when it came to some concepts and theories that were pretty central to statistics. But we didn't want them just to regurgitate those concepts and theories. We wanted them to use those to support and justify the decisions they made when they were going through the process of determining the nature of the statistical problem, formulating a research question, selecting a statistical method, determining if assumptions have been met, running it, interpreting it, to a layperson, a technical audience. And then here comes the last part we added. Explain the concepts and theories that support your interpretation. You got to lay those out. Well, guess what? Our student ratings went down that next semester, but for noble reasons. They went down because we didn't have enough instructional support because we had created a new culminating assessment that added that piece. We thought we had the supports, but you never really know, right? Until you actually do it. So when we made changes, and this kind of iterating the rest of one's career, this is where the action is, because you're beginning to see. And what's funny is we have a course now that students really come out performing at a high level. If you ask them about the course, they'll go, "Oh, we love the course. It's great. We love this part." They know nothing of the blood, sweat, and tears we've put into in the last 8 years. They do not know, and that's okay. But they just think we've always taught that way. It's not true. We never had the practice opportunities like we do now, but it took that kind of iteration. So thank you. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to go through an activity where we're going to use AI as a starting point for designing this developmental path. And what we're going to create at best is a lump of clay that may be interesting to you, okay, in terms of backward designing. In the spirit of the way AI probably should be used, Richard Swan, who's on the call here, we've done this with a lot of courses, what you're about to see. And we would probably, in most cases, not accept that as a final product, but it is a great conversation starter, really good conversation starter. So we're going to begin here, and I'll have to say, Richard and I, he's actually working for getting ready for the new faculty workshop. What you're about to see is kind of a real watered down version of that, but he's done some work here. What I have here is kind of our thoughts or my thoughts about 2 weeks ago, but still I think it'll kind of get the point. So first of all, what we'd like faculty to consider, and this has to do with bringing in the aims of a BYU education, is to think of the values of your discipline. They could be the epistemological, or how a human being knows things in terms of your discipline, its values. Ontological, what are we as human beings when it comes to your discipline, right? Competing and contrasting values in the discipline. We all know they're there. And then here's one of many ways to approach this, but reconciling those contrasting values, contrasting values with the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, here is the first prompt that I'm going to use to create something for the course that I was just talking about. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually share with you this link so you can either follow along or you can use this later on, because I'm going to go through a pretty fast demo for you. And your practice can be with this. In fact, what I'll do is I will demo using this this worksheet here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert this course that I've been talking about. So Microsoft Copilot, see if it lets me in. And there we go. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to learning outcomes.byu.edu. And I'm going to put that in the chat as well. And this has some information about the course that I've been talking about. I hope that will get you there, hopefully. Or you can just type in learningoutcomes.byu.edu. I'm going to go over here, put that in, and I'm going to look for that course. This is Instructional Psychology and Technology 651. So it's a stats course for educators. So I'm going to come to Education, Instructional Psychology. Better do the doctoral program because that's where the course is. Go to 651. Then I'm going to just copy the current learning outcomes. And I'm going to copy the name of the course, just like this. And I'm just going to paste that right here. Highlighting that, and I'm going to paste it. And then I'm going to press the arrow here. Okay. We won't go into this in great detail, but because this may be woefully inadequate, right? But it's just a starting point. in terms of how we view how knowledge is created, right? In terms of empiricism, probabilistic reasoning, objective and transparency. And then here comes ontologically. Reality has patterns and structures that can be modeled. Uncertainty is an inherent feature of human life. Imagine if they only take one stats course, but they realize this reality that there is this notion of uncertainty in life. And where does the gospel of Jesus Christ bring more certainty in a world of uncertainty? Wonderful conversations can be had there. Human act as both observers and subjects within the systems being studied. And a whole host of other, like I may not like these, I may really do a deeper dive and find values in my discipline that I think I really want to highlight in. So it's not just computing standard deviation, right? We'll do that, but we want to have these bigger discussions along the way. Maybe some central questions related to human agency, competing and contrasting values, reconciliation through the gospel of Jesus Christ. These are things that I can build into my curriculum. So instead of with BYU Aims, I say spiritually strengthening, I want to have a prayer in my class. I do. And we did today, right? That's powerful for me. But also, it can be interwoven into the curriculum in a deep, value laden way that doesn't. So the students see that we're like, okay, now we're talking about statistics. Okay, time out. Now we'll talk about discipleship, but they realize that they come together in a whole. Okay, the next one, I'll go back to the we're going to now create a course purpose, what my students will be like by the end of the course. And it's going to take into account what I just, these values, these value expressions. Let's see. Okay. All right. Let's go here. And this is going to give me a one sentence aspirational what my students can become. Students will become discerning stewards of truth who apply statistical reasoning with integrity and spiritual insight to uplift communities, inform ethical decision-making, and magnify human agency through consecrated inquiry. Now, sometimes AI just is, and it's synthesizing my thoughts. If I attach meaning to what I'm reading, I'm probably going to go with it, or I'll probably do some fine tuning. But if it's just a lot of nice words, then I'm going to go with something different. But at least this can inform how I would describe what my students become at the end of the course. Okay, now we go over to writing learning outcomes. And I'm going to copy this very long prompt. It'll let me. And I'm going to paste it right here. Right there. Here we go. And now I'm going to get learning outcomes that have both what we call patterns of disciplinary engagement. That'll be the first one. And then you're going to see aims of a BYU education they're all kind of working together is the idea. Okay, let's see what it gives me. Now notice the verbs here. You know, typical learning outcomes would say students will understand, students will learn the core concepts, students will learn the basic fundamental principles, okay? What we're suggesting is situated in something they would actually do, because they're not going to go out in the world and just continue to learn fundamentals, right? The fundamentals are in service of something bigger. So here you have ascertain the nature of a research problem involving parametric, non-parametric data, select appropriate statistical models, verify assumptions, conduct statistical analysis, evaluate the validity and implications of the results, determine next steps for inquiry, application, communicate findings in APA format to academic and professional audiences. And I can mold this outcome so it is a better fit for what my students need so they can perform very well on the program culminating assessment. Imagine me having an eye to that. And then these others are very important. Discern how statistics can empower individual and collective agency by enabling ethical decisions, stewardship in educational and social contexts, how consecrated inquiry, guided by faith and reason. The hope is that all of these are working together for the total person. That's the hope. Okay, from there, now comes the culminating experience. And this is just the skeleton. Once again, I've never had AI create one that I say I'm using that, but it will provide a skeleton or the elements that can inform you when you're creating. So here it comes. There it is. I have instructions. Now look at this. Eerily in the instructions, it shows all the learning outcomes from that part about disciplinary engagement. They're there. Students will act as statistical consultants. Now we have this element of authenticity for real-world educational social science research projects, working in teams or individually. And then there's the context. There's going to be materials they have to work with, teamwork. Then comes a very high-level quasi-useful rubric that I'm going to have to go in and really make it more useful. But at least it's aligned with the things I'm looking for. Notice here, and this is the question we'll get, faculty will say, I get assessment when it comes to intellectual enlargement, but not the others. How do you assess character? How do you assess spirituality? How do you assess lifelong learning? Well, we would suggest that you don't do it the way that you do cognitively. Here, we're just wanting to know with cognitive performances or psychomotor, you're looking for maximum performance. With affective or these other aims of BYU education, you're looking for typical feelings or behaviors or attitudes or values. So you don't do a performance assessment on that. You ask them questions, and that hence the scaled questions or open-ended questions. How did your faith influence your approach to ethical decision making? In what ways did this experience help you see statistics as a tool for discipleship? Can you imagine most of my students saying it didn't? That's good information, isn't it? When I circle the wagons with my co-instructors, say, what are we going to do about that? We're going to address that, right? Okay. The second to last step here is creating those progress checks. And the progress checks are, as we mentioned before, they provide the structure for a pathway for growth for your students. And I'm going to ask the AI to just come recommend how many progress checks should we put in my calendar, right? And let's see what it comes up with. I will tell you, I only have one progress check, but let's see what it does. Okay, my first progress check looks like it's somewhere in the week 4 or 5. Notice it has some of the verbs. This is a much simpler version than the culminating experience. I've got similar materials, maybe less. The rubric is, not as culminating. I still might have these survey questions along the way. I might not, right? Then I have another progress check right there, weeks 8 and 9. Oh, and it gave me a third one on week 12. Okay, great, with rubrics. I may say, you know what? I only want 2 progress checks. Now, I could have told it the week. That probably would have been better. I want one in week, 5 and one in week 8. And it'll adjust for you as you go. Okay. Now here comes the last. Thank you for hanging in there with me with this rapid fire AI experience. Okay. Now we are ready to form a 16-week schedule. And it's funny because when I first started teaching at BYU 20 plus years ago it was a assessing learning outcomes course. Guess what the first thing I was trying to figure out to do? What in the world am I going to do on day 1, right? And day 3 and day 5 and day 8. And so I had mapped that out. It was very content centric. And I still think the students had an okay experience. But at BYU, we're not about an okay experience, right? We're about something much more. So let's come in here. I never know exactly what it's going to do. So here we go. Okay, so it's giving me, okay, so I've got my targeted learning outcomes. We recommend a column for that, so we know what we're targeting. What they're going to do before class, what they're going to do, and notice it's what they're going to do. Now I can put what I'm going to do too. I'm going to explain, but they'll, like here, watch a video on types of data and research questions, read intro to parametric, non-parametric, practice ascertaining research questions. That's an important skill. If a student can do that, ascertain from a sample of scenarios, they can actually, and maybe I don't like the word ascertain, maybe formulate research questions would be better from a problem. That's not a skill you'll usually see in a textbook. The content in the textbook is very important, but skills, we tend to have to take control of that for because it's hard to find textbooks that are in a kind of performance modality. They're more in a topical modality. And then look, verifying assumptions, conducting analysis. Then comes their first progress check, right here, progress check 1. And notice how every week is building to the next progress check. In my class, we call it showtime. It's showtime. And they're ready to go and they're practicing. And they really do see us as coaches because we created all this material, a lot of it now through refined AI. We don't have to give as much feedback. We give hundreds of model answers. But we tell our students by the end of the semester, they need to find their own voice. And it was interesting in the spring term, I would ask students, have you found your voice? They go, yes. I go, show it to me. And I give them a problem, and then I could tell they were still regurgitating. I'd say, okay, that sounds a lot like this. Where is your voice in there? They go, oh, I'm still working on it. But by the end of the semester, it was great to hear them kind of put our models to the side and say, let me put it into my own words. Let me give my own metaphors. And that's very empowering when they develop that kind of fluency. Okay. And then the idea, of course, is we bring it back into, we test all of these with our students. And then through that testing, we continue to iterate these courses until they become more and more powerful for future generations. So, well, Mike, I finished a little earlier today, so it gives us the time.